Okay, welcome back. So for our second half of the morning, and I'll again remind you we have lunch. Hopefully you brought your own, although we're going to have a fruit platter here for everybody. And after lunch, we've got the Torah study with Rabbi Feinstein and then the Great Decisions discussion group. But it's my pleasure now to introduce again Bill Green, who's going to be talking about the latest update from NASA. Bill Green is one of our Hazak members, as you know, and on our steering committee. He's a retired engineer from CalTech, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and he was also involved in infrared processing and analysis center. Are you still serving as a consultant too? And he's still active as a consultant and has been involved wherever. He helped lead a tour that we had right before COVID shut us down of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and maybe we'll reprise that in the future. In any case, welcome back, Bill. We look forward to your update, and some people in this room want to know when we can get off Earth and go to some other safer, quieter location. All yours.
Thanks, nice to be back. Go through some new stuff for you. Let me go here. We're going to do three things today. We're going to be talking about, how many of you know we're going to be going back to the moon in 2 or 3, 4 years? At least 10% of you. Well, we're going to supposedly be going back to the moon in a few years. So I'll talk about that and how that's going along. Spend most of the time on the James Webb Telescope, which is an infrared telescope out in space that's the best thing that's ever flown to do astrophysics and astronomy. And I'll be showing you some of the images from there, and I've got some really good videos that explain, it's not just a beautiful image, but it explains what the heck is going on in the part of the universe that they're looking at with that image. And then I'll take you to a little bit of information on protecting the Earth from possible asteroids that might cause enough damage to affect the environment on a project that is the one I'm actually consulting on now, which is to fly an infrared telescope designed to find any Earth-threatening asteroids in the next 100 years or so. So those are the three things we'll cover today. We'll start with returning to the moon. There's a project called Artemis. Artemis is the daughter of Apollo, if you want to know where they got that name. And if you remember the Apollo missions, most people in this room probably do. That's where they got the name for this mission.
We're going to the moon to explore, and we're going to the moon for scientific discovery.
Our destiny is always to go and see what's further and what's next.
The moon is a stepping stone, and the moon is a place we need to learn how to live so that we can continue to go beyond.
Can we get the audio up in the back?
We're focused on all that lies before us. Only together will we bring to life this global ambition of returning to the moon. And while our work is far from finished, we've never been closer to seeing a new generation step beyond our home planet. We are building on the achievements of those who came before. The giants who conquered gravity and raised a banner in the heavens. They beckon us to go farther, to the moon and on to Mars, to seek a deeper understanding of our universe and bring all that we learn home. 2020 was a year of unpredictable hardships, and yet, step by step, we resolve to press forward toward this grand vision. The daily efforts of thousands of suppliers from all across this country and around the world fed into stunning milestones and laid the groundwork for history. Artemis has been woven into our culture. It has fostered collaboration across the aisles and across the ponds. It has grown beyond plans and preparations to include hardware and software. And now, it has a heartbeat. You can feel the momentum. It is undeniable. We are going. And together, we will see Artemis light the way.
Our mission to the moon is no longer some far-fetched dream. This is reality. We are going.
This is the next step in evolution.
They're not just PowerPoint slides. They're actually metals being bent, shaped, formed to build the things that we're going to use.
This is real. This is going to happen. We're going.
We are going to the moon to learn how to live on other planets for the benefit of all.
Let's go.
So the best line in that video is, it's no longer PowerPoint presentations, it's real.
We're going to the moon to
And it is. Here's the pieces and parts that are necessary for the first couple of missions to the moon. You need a spacecraft to take the astronauts from here to the moon and get them back safely. You need a launch system to put it up into space and get it out to the moon. And you need some expanded capability at the Cape to handle not only this mission, but all the other commercial missions that are now using all the communications and launch capabilities at the Cape. That's expanding like crazy. So they're rebuilding that whole system while they're at it. And then they're going to put a different kind of spacecraft in orbit around the moon called Gateway. And the plan is you will launch from the Earth with one spaceship. You'll transfer to Gateway. That'll be the place that you stay for a little bit to get ready. And then you go down to the surface from there. If you're an astronaut, you stay there in something that's called an Artemis base camp for as long as the mission requires. Then you come back up to the Gateway spacecraft, transfer back to the crew module that you'll see in a few minutes, and come back to the Earth and land in the ocean, assuming the parachutes work. So that's kind of the whole system, and pieces and parts were tested successfully in the first mission that tied some of those parts together and tested it going to the moon. So Artemis 1 is a mission you probably heard about. It was completed in December. It was unmanned, but it had all the pieces and parts that you need for a manned mission, or a personed mission, I guess, in these days. So there are going to be astronauts on it in the second second mission. They'll fly the same mission with a crew on board. And then Artemis 3 is the one that'll be quite a bit after that. And that's the one where the first crew will have a Gateway spacecraft waiting for them to transfer them down to the moon and get them back up to the crew module to come home. And SpaceX is going to be part of that as well, the commercial company. So it's quite an endeavor. Here's what parts of it look like on the upper left. That's the crew module. On top of it is that little pointed part. That's the escape module. If there's a problem on launch, the astronauts go up into the top of that thing and it shoots off and brings them back to Earth safely so they don't get lost. That's the equipment heading out for the launch pad. You're looking at a launch vehicle with a crew capsule on it that's 322 feet tall. So it's fairly good size. That's how it looks at night, if you want a dramatic public relations picture. And here's the mission plan, and here's what was actually executed without astronauts on board. You connect the Space Launch System, which is the rocket, to the crew module, which is carried by another spacecraft called Orion. You go out to the launch site, you launch. The whole system goes into orbit around the Earth, and then it deploys the front part, the top part, after all the propellant is gone from the main launch vehicle. The launch vehicle is dropped off, and another little vehicle goes out toward the moon, takes the crew capsule out there. Several days later, this flew 280,000 miles out past the moon. That's further than any human has gone into space until now. They then turned it around, brought it back into lunar orbit, and it orbited the Earth for 6 days. And then it again separates the crew module from what was propelling it all this time and sends it back to Earth. and it drops into the atmosphere and goes into the ocean, and the crew's taken off the capsule at that point with the recovery vessel. So that was a 4 to 6 week mission, and for that whole thing to work successfully blew my mind and everybody else's, I think, because all those pieces and parts had to work flawlessly, and they did. So I'm going to show you some videos from that mission. It was launched in November, 25 days. It traveled, the crew, what would have been the crew, traveled 1.4 million miles. When that crew capsule comes back into the atmosphere, it's traveling 25,000 miles an hour, and it has to be slowed down enough to deploy some parachutes to get the astronauts down into the ocean safely in their capsule. And splashdown was December 11th. This is a diagram you can't possibly follow, but it basically says, okay, you launch, you go around the Earth. The kind of sickly green track is the track out to the point way beyond the moon. Then you come back, you orbit the moon for a while, and then you come back to Earth, drop the capsule into the ocean. That's kind of what it looks like. This is right after launch. You know, auxiliary rockets or solid rockets on the sides to give it extra boost for the weight that's necessary to launch and get into space. They drop off. Eventually, the crew module is taken out by the Orion spacecraft out to the moon, goes past the moon. By the way, it drops off about 8 or 10 of these little CubeSats that I talked about a couple of years ago here. These little spacecraft about the size of a big basketball. Dropped about 10 of those off to do some lunar science research while it was there. And then here comes the crew module back and into the ocean. This mission, the Artemis 1, carried dummies, pardon the expression. They were instrumented like crazy, so they had a perfect record of what the humans will actually experience through all of these transitions. And so they were monitoring those dummies the whole time. Got a lot of information about that. And I'm going to skip that. I think I'm going to show you this one. This is real videos from the mission itself. There's Orion leaving the Earth, heading for the moon. Goes out past the moon, looking back to the Earth and the moon. Coming back around. There's the Earth in the distance now. And crew module's going to head for home at this point. So this is the view from inside the capsule they're showing you as the thing goes down through the atmosphere. The heat shield slows the spacecraft down. The recovery ship is waiting. The crew will see that on their way back. And they're going to start watching for parachutes. Make sure they open. Okay, so that all worked. So after that mission, Artemis 2, probably sometime next year, they'll repeat this whole thing with live astronauts on it. And then the third mission, as I said, will take folks to the moon and they'll be orbiting the moon. They won't go, well, the third one will land on the moon. So, and also Elon Musk will be involved in this because he's got a rocket even bigger than what you just saw. And somehow they're going to weave using that thing in the third mission as well as the Space Launch System. And Elon Musk will be happy because he will have the largest, biggest, whatever launch vehicle of anybody on Earth, and that should make him happy for a while. So get him off his Twitter adventure. Okay, so that's getting back to the moon. I'm going to spend some time now on the James Webb Telescope, which I've spoken about before. I'll just give you the quick refresher course on that. It was launched back in 2021. It was 20 years in development and cost $20 billion. That wasn't the original plan, of course, but God, I was consulting on that thing in, I think it was 2003, and it was just getting started, and they were looking at flying in about 5 or 6 years after that. Took a lot longer than that. 5.5 year operation. They hoped once it got into space, it turned out there was enough fuel to navigate the spacecraft so it could last probably 20 years is what they're guessing now. Europeans are involved in this, Canada's involved in this, so they were part of the $20 billion, thank heavens. The spacecraft deployed weighs about 6 tons, so you got a 6-ton telescope operating out there in space with a mirror that's 21 feet in diameter, and that whole thing has to be unfolded in space and put in a position to be able to actually capture the light and get the images. And there are 4 major science instruments that you'll hear about in a minute on this spacecraft. There's a big shield at the bottom because we're going to be looking at an infrared telescope. And infrared, you have to be cold to be able to detect the heat that's coming from very distant objects like stars and galaxies and so on. So the 4 instruments are housed behind the gold thing there. So what happens is the light comes in, sorry for the folks on Zoom, the light comes in, hits the gold main mirror, gets reflected out to the secondary mirror, which is out there on the sticks, and then goes back through actually the center of the mirror, and the 4 instruments are behind the gold mirror. So that's sort of how the light's collected for the images. It's another look. What you need to get the resolution that it has is a very big mirror, which they definitely have. And for infrared, you need a very cold camera system. That's a comparison. If you heard of Hubble for the last 20 years or so, that was the best thing out there in space. And James Webb is just incredibly larger mirror size and even better than Hubble, which has been on its own very interesting, really paid off. So what's this looking at? Well, it's trying to find the first galaxies or luminous objects that were formed after the Big Bang. With this kind of a telescope, you can actually look back in time, and you can get images of what was going on deep in the universe, like maybe 13 billion years ago, for example. So that's one of the things they're looking at, is how are galaxies formed, how are stars formed, how do galaxies evolve to be the huge structures we see out there in space today. How do the stars form? They go into the galaxies. What are the first stages of planetary systems that form around stars like we're riding around today? And they also have spectrometers on there that'll be able to tell you the chemical composition of objects that they're looking at. So particularly in our solar system and in stars that are nearby, they'll be looking at planets to see if the composition in the atmosphere is the same chemically as we have here for planets that are our size and roughly about the same distance from their host stars. So those are the kinds of things they're looking for, and boy, have they been making progress this year. So talk about infrared for a minute. Your eyes only see part of the spectrum that's actually out there. So you've probably seen this kind of thing before, like a night vision camera. You look in the dark, you can't see anything out there, but you get an infrared detector and things show up, like the reindeer that are running around there outside of Santa's workshop. And then you can use color, even though your eyes aren't seeing this, you can use color to get the structure of the objects you're looking at. So the guy at the upper left, he's got a hotter face, but if you look where his glasses are, it's blocking the heat from coming toward the camera. The guy on the right is showing you that if you have something obscuring what he's holding in his hands, in visible light, you can use infrared to pick up the heat that's coming from inside that black bag, and you can pick up the heat, and you can actually image what's inside the bag using infrared. And the same effect is going on with the glasses up there. It's blocking that light, blocking the heat. So that's sort of how infrared works. You're not looking at true color, you're looking at what's the radiation light that's coming off of this object caused by whatever's going on. And here's an example of the Orion Nebula, which, by the way, is in the sky these days if you want to go outside one night. And if you do, it'll look like it does on the left. You'll see a black sky, a bunch of white dots, and somebody will sketch in this Orion's belt and a sword for you to help you. If you look in the infrared, if you get outside the atmosphere, which is blocking most of the infrared signal, that's what's out there. There's gas and there's dust, cosmic dust, and it all shows up in infrared because it's hot enough to show up in infrared but not be seen by your eyes. And down at the bottom it shows the little, out of all the electromagnetic spectrum, all we see with our eyes are the colored things in the middle of that diagram that says visible. Infrared goes out to the right, and it goes out quite a bit further. So this shows you a little bit about visible light and where it lies in the spectrum. Hubble, the instruments were designed to look at visible light, a little bit of the ultraviolet. And at the time Hubble was done, quite a while ago now, there were not detectors that could pick up far infrared, but the advance in the detectors has been such that James Webb can cover a huge area in the infrared, which is much wider than the distance that we can see in with our own eyes. So you're getting a huge increase in how much of the infrared spectrum is covered by the two cameras that are on that telescope, and how much better than Hubble that is. So, summary, range of infrared light much broader than visible light. The Earth's atmosphere blocks almost all the infrared light from space, so we can't see some of this stuff out there. And that's why we send telescopes out into space with very cold infrared cameras so we can see more of what's out there. There's cosmic dust everywhere. You always think of space as being a vast empty place. It's not. There's all this dust around, and it's obscuring our view of a lot of things. But infrared gets through that, the heat gets through that, and you can actually see what's behind the dust in a lot of areas. So that's how the thing works to first order. So then you deal with astronomers and scientists, and they're interested in seeing different things. It's an age of specialization. They all specialize in something. Some astronomers want to figure out how stars are born. Some astronomers want to figure out how stars die. Some astronomers want to figure out how galaxies are formed, and other astronomers want to figure out what happens when two galaxies collide in space, which happens. And some astronomers want to find out the chemical composition of atmospheres around a distant planet or the cosmic dust itself. And so what you do if you're in the image processing business, which I was, the scientists come in and they tell you, okay, we're flying this kind of camera. And a scientist will come in and he'll say, I'm interested in star formation. And we're flying this camera, it's an infrared camera. Here are the wavelengths I want to really distinguish in all the data that's going to be in that image. So what we do is we go in and we colorize just that band of the spectrum that he wants to see, so he sees the variation within the band that he's interested in. Next scientist comes in and he says, well, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in stars dying. And they're cooler, they show up in a different part of the spectrum. So that image doesn't help me in my research. I need one that highlights these wavelengths over here. So then we colorize those wavelengths for him or her, and they get to understand what's going on in the processes that they're interested in. So it's all a matter of colorizing the images in ways that the scientists can interpret the data. It has nothing to do with how it would actually look if you were sitting out there in that area. You don't want to be. And finally, this always blows everybody's mind, but the way we're going to be measuring distance is a light year. And a light year is how far it takes light how far does light travel in 1 Earth year? And the answer is 6 trillion miles. So you're going to be looking at images that are 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 light years wide. And you're going to be looking at images that are hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of light years away from the Earth. So just get your mind ready to expand a little bit while we're going through this. So the thing I really loved finding was on the Today Show did an interview with the people at the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore, and they're the group they found was the group that does the colorizing of the images for the scientists, and so they found 2 people there and interviewed them and put it on the Today Show, and I really enjoyed it because what we used to do.
Begins a voyage back to the birth of the universe.
It was just over a year ago. The Webb telescope was launched into space by an Ariane 5 rocket. Last summer, we saw the first pictures, and the world was wowed. No one had ever seen space this way before. Views from the edge of the universe brought to us by Webb and these 2, working from a tiny office in Baltimore at the Space Telescope Science Institute. Visual developers
Ryan?
Joseph DePasquale and Elisa Pagan. Joe worked on the first image beamed back from Webb, the Tarantula Nebula.
Realizing that I was literally the first person in the world to ever see the way this is going to look as it's transmitted across the world and millions of people see it. That was just a very overwhelming moment for me. Actually teared up a little bit.
I hear a little wavering in your voice as you talk about it.
Yeah, it was powerful.
The telescope, 30 years in development at a cost of $10 billion, can see in the dark, much like night goggles used by soldiers or firemen. Light from stars and galaxies far, far away fade through time and space, but they can be seen through an infrared camera.
So this is really, really deep. This is looking at the first galaxies. The reddest galaxies here are some of the first galaxies to form after the Big Bang.
Like 14 billion years ago.
Right, and we're detecting that light now with Webb.
Closer to home, take a look at the Carina Nebula, a star nursery, so to speak, in our very own Milky Way. You did this one?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
I fought for it.
Elisa took the black and white raw image from Webb and assigned colors to different infrared wavelengths. It's called chromatic ordering.
The shortest wavelength is the bluer color,
Right.
and the longest wavelength is the redder color.
And because there is no horizon in space, Elisa aligned it to a provocative perspective.
We adjusted the orientation purposely to make it feel more grounded and to show that this is like a mountainous region.
And in case you are wondering, how big is this?
Basically, from the bottom of the image to the top of this peak is about 4 light years. And a light year is the distance that light travels in 1 year. It's about 6 trillion miles. So...
Elisa, do you ever get overwhelmed?
Oh, yeah. I get overwhelmed all the time. I mean, first I think, how am I the one to be able to do this?
Perhaps because the one-time and still sometime baker never dreamed she'd have a job as cool as this.
My mom is from El Salvador and my dad's from Puerto Rico.
What does it mean to be an immigrant's child and to have achieved what you're achieving right now?
It does feel really good, and I'm happy to be doing outreach where people can see, like, oh, that's someone that looks like me, and I could be them, and I like to help people feel like they could do anything they want to do.
Back in that tiny office, we watched as Elisa and Joe worked on a new image.
What are we looking at here?
NGC 346.
Oh,
but
I know that one.
It's a well-known nebula in the Large Magellanic Clouds.
It's our responsibility to describe what we were observing here.
Right. Polycyclic.
Yeah.
Aromatic.
Hydrocarbons.
Hydrocarbons.
Yeah.
But to be honest, we haven't a clue.
It felt like it looked like a lamp. And so this is our final image that we have here.
Wow.
Science and art in perfect harmony.
There's some optimism, Joe, I think, that goes with this kind of work.
Absolutely. Yeah. Going back to the Carl Sagan quote of "We are star stuff," we are the universe. And when we look in these images and we're pondering the universe, we are the universe attempting to understand itself.
So I really enjoyed that interview. I hope you did. That's sort of how it is, but it's much more frantic in the real world. But other than that,
James Webb begins a voyage.
So I've got a few images now, and what I found was some videos where they actually go through and they described exactly what's going on in the images, other than it's a really terrific looking image. So it was kind of fun to show this. I was really glad to find these.
Let us begin with the first image that NASA chose to release, a galaxy cluster named SMACS 0723. It is the deepest and sharpest infrared image of the distant universe ever taken by a telescope. Every pixel of this picture is overflowing with details. Let's start with the brightest spots with spikes in this image. They're the stars of our own galaxies, more like the objects sitting on our noses. Around the center of the image lies the galaxy cluster about 4.6 billion light-years away. So the light we are seeing now was emitted from these galaxies 4.6 billion years ago when the Earth was forming. But this is just the beginning of the details that this image contains. Due to its combined mass, a galaxy cluster bends the light from the background objects. This effect is known as gravitational lensing, and was predicted by Albert Einstein using his general theory of relativity in 1936. The galaxy cluster comprising the bright, elliptical galaxy in the center and smaller white galaxies distorts the light path from the background galaxies. And because of that, we see lensed images of even farther galaxies that are otherwise out of our view. Webb's deep field image portrays gravitational lensing in a way we've never seen before. One can see prominent orange arcs on the left and right sides of the brightest cluster galaxy. These represent the lensed galaxies, with individual galaxies popping out twice in the arc. However, not all galaxies are mirrored. Some also appear stretched as a result of the magnification. And surprisingly, the galaxies located behind the cluster look nothing like the spiral or elliptical galaxies we find in our local universe. Instead, they look comparatively clumpier and more regular. This very thin arc is one of the most magnificent objects in this image that truly demonstrates the power of the James Webb Space Telescope. Hubble barely detected this arc, but Webb sees the beads on a string clearly. They're likely individual star clusters in the extremely distant, tiny galaxy. We can see similarly amazing details all over the deep field. For point-like objects, Webb is expected to be beyond 100 times more sensitive than Hubble. In the background, faint red galaxies appear scattered all over. And when Webb took the spectra of one such galaxy, it found signatures of oxygen, hydrogen, and neon flourishing there. This makes Webb the first telescope to reveal such details of a galaxy that is more than 13 billion years old, bringing us closer to our origins.
So the gravitational lensing was really fascinating. When I was in physics classes at UCLA studying some of this stuff, they mentioned the theory that Einstein had about light being able to be warped. Light would get warped if it went past a very, very large, very dense object out there in space. And I just couldn't imagine that. And on the mission before this that I was working on at the time at CalTech, they were finding lensed galaxies for the first time in the Spitzer Space Telescope. And so I went to one of the astronomers. I said, "You got to show me one of these things." And so he pulled out a couple images, put them on a screen, and sure enough, there was the round lensing effect that they were talking about there. And what that means is you can actually see things that are behind, things that are blocking your view. It gets warped around because there's so much mass in these galaxies, and they can come out and they can infer other galaxies behind the ones that you're actually seeing in the image. They can figure out there's some other ones back there and roughly what they're like. It just absolutely blows my mind.
Let us begin with the first image that...
Here's a nice one. Southern Ring
The next Webb
Nebula.
image is of a planetary nebula, a dying star about 2,500 light years away, known as the Southern Ring Nebula. NASA released 2 images of this nebula, one captured by the near-infrared camera, or NIRCam, and the other by the mid-infrared camera, or MIRI. A planetary nebula forms when a sun-like star ejects its outer layers at the end of its life. This near-infrared image captured by NIRCam shows a very bubbly view of a nebula, with its structured shells also visible. The orange hue represents the newly formed molecular hydrogen during expansion. At the same time, the blue haze signifies the hot ionized gas heated by the core of the host star. The best thing about Webb's image of the Southern Ring Nebula is that it revealed something that astronomers predicted long ago. The bright star you see in the Hubble image of this nebula is in an early stage of evolution, so astronomers knew that a dying star must be nearby that was responsible for the Southern Ring Nebula. Unfortunately, however, no telescope could ever find it, but Webb's advanced infrared capabilities did the job. MIRI finally found the source of the nebula, a dying star surrounded by gas and dust. As the star turned into a white dwarf, it periodically ejected mass. The process repeated. The star contracted and heated up, eventually ejecting at least 8 layers of gas and dust over thousands of years. And the accompanying star helped it in stirring the material. Webb has captured this image with unmatchable details. There's also a bright angled line that appears to be a gas filament from the nebula itself. But astronomers found it to be a distant edge-on galaxy when they investigated the light source. Further, many distant spirals of different shapes and colors, some very small, dusty, and red, enhance the overall view. The next Webb...
And then here's one of my favorites, Stephan's quintet. You're going to see multiple galaxies in this, and they're not as close as they look in the images you'll hear. They're quite far from each other, but they're all clustered in one part of the of space.
The fourth image in Webb's collection is an enormous mosaic of Stephan's quintet, a visual cluster of 5 galaxies captured by NIRCam and MIRI. Although this group is referred to as a quintet, only 4 galaxies can be seen close together, with the 5th lying in the foreground compared with the other 4. And what makes this image extremely special is that it is the largest image taken by Webb. It contains over 150 million pixels and is constructed from almost 1,000 separate image files. This image flaunts clusters of millions of young stars, also sweeping tails of gas, dust, and stars being pulled from some of the galaxies due to gravitational interactions are visible. MIRI has also captured huge shock waves as one of those galaxies. NGC 7318b is smashing through the cluster. The regions surrounding the central pair of galaxies are shown in the colors red and gold. One can see a distinct difference in color between the dust in the galaxies versus the shock waves between the interacting galaxies. The image specialists have used yellow and orange colors to indicate the difference in MIRI data, in contrast to the blue and white colors assigned to stars at near-infrared wavelengths. A deeper analysis of this image can offer fundamental insights into how galactic interactions may have driven galaxy evolution in the early universe.
So interesting story about the two cameras he's talking about. There are two infrared cameras on the mission, one for the near infrared and another one for the far infrared. So they pick up different wavelengths, and then they combine them together for some of these images. So the two cameras, the way that works is scientists propose to develop their instruments and fly them on the mission, and there were two astronomers proposing from University of Arizona. One was a guy named George Ricci, who built the infrared camera on the Spitzer mission that I worked on at CalTech. And the other was his wife, Marcia Ricci. They're both astronomers, and they each won the task of putting a camera together. So two of those cameras were built under the direction of a husband and wife team at University of Arizona. It's pretty interesting. This is the Carina Nebula. It's probably an image you've seen on TV before.
The Carina Nebula is perhaps the most beautiful image of the first set. Unlike the Southern Ring Nebula, this one is a star-forming region about 7,600 light-years away. This spectacular image revealing previously invisible areas of stellar nurseries was taken with the joint forces of Webb's NIRCam and MIRI. With its crisp resolution and unparalleled sensitivity, NIRCam has unveiled hundreds of previously hidden stars and even numerous background galaxies in this image. We can see bubbles and cavities blown by the intense radiation and stellar winds of newborn stars. Also, some protostellar jets of golden hue are being blown out by the infant stars. There are hot stars on the top rim of the image, and their radiation pushes down the dust and gas to further condense it into more stars and baby planets. However, at the same time, intense radiation can also erode gas and dust, halting star and planet formation. So in one way, this image represents a balance in the ongoing polar phenomenon and shows how our solar system once formed in such an environment. The steam that appears to rise from the mountain-like structures is hot, ionized gas. Each such structure is about 7 light-years, or 42 trillion miles tall. The formation period of a star lasts only about 50,000 to 100,000 years. This makes early star formation extremely difficult to be captured. But with Webb's sensitivity and unprecedented spatial resolution, we have been able to record this rare event and hope for more spectacular observations every coming week.
I don't know if you remember the video from the Today Show, but the young gal that was doing this image, the Carina Nebula image, when they first introduced that image, she said, "I fought for that one," because she wanted to process that one, and she did. This image you probably saw from Hubble many years ago. It's called the Pillars of Creation. It was one of the first images that showed star formation somewhat closer to Earth than some of the stuff you've been looking at. And so, of course, James Webb had to go there and take a look at it.
The Pillars of Creation lie 6,500 light-years away. This area is brimming with gas and dust, essential ingredients for star formation. A new near-infrared image from the Webb Space Telescope shows the scene in high definition. Glowing, bright red wavy lines appear at the edges of some pillars, revealing where stars are ejecting material as they form. The bright red orbs are newly formed stars that have burst into view. Distant galaxies typically make appearances in Webb's images, but not this one. A translucent layer of gas and dust is drawn like a curtain, allowing the stars to take center stage. Webb's near-infrared image of the pillars of creation will help researchers update their models of star formation. Over time, we'll learn how stars form and burst out of these dusty clouds over millions of years.
So there's a comparison between Hubble and the James Webb Telescope. And this is a fairly recent one. This is another image. This is just one galaxy where stars are forming. It's 24 million light years away if you want to start doing the arithmetic. And this image is 70,000 light years across. Can you imagine? We'll start multiplying by a billion, multiple billions, and you'll get the number. There's an incredible amount of stuff going on there. Okay, if you want more on the Webb Telescope, go to webbtelescope.org. And if you have access to PBS on the internet, go see this documentary they just released about a month ago now. It summarizes with the science teams area by area of the astronomy what they have found in the first year of this thing flying. And I got to give NOVA and PBS credit because they've done it in language that most people can generally understand what the heck they're talking about. And it's really a good documentary to look for. So I highly recommend it. Okay, I'm going to finish up with a little bit about asteroids now, a little bit closer to Earth. There's a new telescope that's going to be flying. Well, now it's going to be delayed another year because of the federal budget, but it's going to be flying in the next few years. And it's called the Near Earth Object Surveyor, and it's designed to find all the Earth-threatening asteroids that may hit the Earth or come into Earth's neighborhood within the next 100 years. It was originally authorized by Congress in 2005, and its job was find 90% of near-Earth objects 460 feet in diameter or bigger, which has been ruled the size that could really cause significant environmental effects if it ever hit the Earth, and go find them. So they authorized NASA to do that. In fact, they ordered NASA to do it in 2005 and then proceeded not to fund it for several years. And most recently, they cut the funding this year too, so they delayed launch another year. So that's Congress for you. Okay, this shows why we give a damn about these big asteroids. The white circle is our orbit around the sun, and the red stuff shows an asteroid flying in from somewhere on its own orbit around the sun, and it goes zinging around, and it may cross the Earth's orbit at some point, and it might do it 4 times, as you can see, coming in and then going out. And so you definitely want to tag that one and take a look and see, is the Earth going to be anywhere near that asteroid when it cuts across the Earth's orbit? So that's the name of the asteroid hazard finding game. Why do we care? This is what we think killed all the dinosaurs on Earth. The theory is that an asteroid about 100 to 180 miles across landed in the formed this thing in the Yucatan Peninsula, this big round bay, and it kicked up so much junk and caused so much disruption of the atmosphere that the plants died because they couldn't get enough sun to live anymore, and that affected the dinosaurs. So that's the theory. New Yorker reported on this way. Here's a couple of dinosaurs having their lunch, and they're looking up in the sky and they see this thing coming down and they say, oh, I can't believe I ate all that salad for nothing. So they could see it coming. Anyway, More realistically, this is 1908 in Siberia. Unfortunately, Putin was not there at the time, but this, this asteroid did hit the Earth. Hundreds of square miles of forest were devastated up there. So, like I say, unfortunately, he wasn't standing and watching. This is another one more recently in 2013. This is what started the money flowing again to that project that I'm on. Because in 2013, this asteroid approached and it hit the Earth, and it really caused some serious damage in Russia. And it was going about 42,500 miles an hour when it hit the Earth. 1,500 people got injured. There were several people killed by the impact of this thing. And Congress decided maybe it was time to fund this stuff again. So they did. And that's that. With, first of all, some Earth-based telescope programs designed to find moving objects like asteroids, and then from space telescopes that have been up there for a few years now. This is the rate at which we're discovering new asteroids. I mean, originally, when asteroids were discovered, a little over 100 years ago, people thought there were 4 of them. And it really turns out they're only off by a factor of 100,000. So far, 400,000 have been discovered. And then how much are dangerous? Well, the color shows you the size. So you can see there's a lot of small ones, like maybe 30,000 of them. And then there's about 10,000 that are 140 meters or more, and some that are half a mile across. There's a few of those that have been found as well. And these are all in the neighborhood of the Earth. We're not even looking at the ones that are out near Mars and Jupiter orbiting the sun out there. These are ones that are orbiting in near Earth, what's called a near Earth orbit. So that's the name of the game for this project, is to go up there and find all of them and compute their trajectory and make sure they won't damage the Earth. And if they will, figure out where they're going to be and then design something to get rid of them before they hit us. This is an asteroid that was discovered in 1999. So it's fairly recent. Its diameter is about 1,700 feet. It's not heading for the Earth, and we actually sent a spacecraft out there, orbited the asteroid for a while, looking down at the surface, and then when they found what looked like decent landing spots, they landed 4 times with a little lander scooper, and they scooped up some material from the surface, packaged it up, brought it back to the spacecraft orbiting, and then the spacecraft is now coming back to the Earth, and it's going to drop off the samples sometime next year. So we'll actually be able to see what one of these big ones is made of and see if our theories are correct. The mission concept for this mission is send an infrared telescope out there with 2 infrared bands, which can tell you what the size of the asteroid is, and go find them. Spend 4 years finding all the Earth-threatening ones. The way you find an asteroid, if you take an image of the sky and you come back a little later and take another one and another one and another one, generally the stars aren't relatively moving. So the stars in the image look like they're fixed. But if you see something that's showing up, but it appears to be moving, and it appears to be moving in some way that looks like a track, that it's actually moving and orbiting the Earth, and you can figure out the track, then you found an asteroid. And you need really, as it turns out, 4 sightings of the same object moving through the sky to be able to compute a trajectory accurate enough to figure out if it's ever going to cross the Earth's trajectory. So that's how you survey the sky. Don't worry about reading it. That's just an image of how you do it. The name of the game in everything you see in the night sky is, of course, where are the asteroids, separating it from everything else. There's one that's been found and confirmed by a previous mission. And I'll just show you how the sampling goes. Here's what you do. You launch this telescope and it does 4 looks. This is the sky you're looking at, and it's taking in this part of the sky 4 swipes of images, sends them all down, then you turn the computers loose, and you start looking for things that are moving against the star background. And that's how you find asteroids if you ever feel like doing this in your backyard. This is an example again. When you see green showing up, that means asteroids have been confirmed. And this is a simulation that we ran to make sure the survey plan was good enough. And this is what the engineers think will be the buildup of asteroid knowledge spinning around the Earth there as the mission goes on. You're seeing more and more asteroids discovered as this mission goes on and does its surveying. And finally, I'm going to give you a little thing I found the other day because I just thought it was fun. We're going to go back to Mars for a minute. There's a rover on Mars, which we talked about at length here a year or two ago, and it's been roaming and it's been collecting samples that'll be retrieved and returned to the Earth by a later mission. And so those are all now stored on the surface. Meanwhile, one day a little dust devil, it's kind of like living in the South right now. There's dust devils showing up, which are common on Mars. A lot of them have been seen by other missions and this mission. But this one was heading right toward the spacecraft. So they turned on, they have a microphone on the rover. And if you want to hear what a dust devil sounds like going over a spacecraft on the surface of Mars, I just happened to have that for you. Hope the audio is good enough in the room. So there it is in the distance. Cool. I just thought I'd throw that in to remind you the work on Mars is still going on. So I think that's it. Questions?
Thank you. So we got time for a couple questions.
I'm curious whether you have any tips for us for tomorrow when we look up at the moon at sunset and see the 5 planets, what we should be looking for and what's the best way to look at them with binoculars or, for simple folks.
Yeah, if you can steady your binoculars well enough to look, but you're just going to see different colored, there'll be color differences between those 5. But to really distinguish them from the rest of the sky background, depending on where you're living, if you're sitting in the middle of the San Fernando Valley, it's hard as hell to see some of this stuff because of all the light pollution. But I would just go on your website and say, show me what's the 5 planets going to look like tonight in Los Angeles, and they'll show you where to look in the sky and where to point your head. But sometimes it's really hard to see at night because there's so much light around here. It's terrible.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it true that putting up your fist is approximately 70 degrees and your thumb is 10 degrees?
Sounds right. Sounds right.
I have 2 questions about the Near Earth exploration.
Mm-hmm.
The first has to do with the vest that was developed by the Israelis. I believe was put on a dummy in the last manned trip. And I was very interested in finding out physiological effects of space on human beings. Have we found out anything about that?
I don't know, it's not my department.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a lot of work that goes on humans in space and what's the effect of weightlessness, for example, long periods of weightlessness. You remember the twin brothers on the space station? They compared one to the other after one was on the space station for a year and the other one wasn't, and they tracked both of them for that year to see what was different. And all kinds of medical stuff goes on. Again, not my department. Maybe Joel can answer that, but
the second question has to do with the nefarious intention of some of our enemies in terms of gaining information about near-Earth exploration. I was curious about the data collection on that. Is it all open platform, or are we sort of sifting through the data and keeping some of it secure so that it can't be apprehended by people with ill intent?
Okay, so first of all, there's a central place where anyone in the world who's in astronomy and thinks they have found an asteroid in the sky, they can send the information, that 4-image sample. When they get a track good enough that they think they've defined the orbit around the sun, whether or not it's going to be Earth-threatening, they then send that data to what's called the Minor Planet Center, which is at Harvard-Smithsonian in Boston. And they look through, and if they verify the calculations, then they post it. So there's an internationally accessible database. It said 400,000 asteroids near the Earth. There's more than that out further out. That's all cataloged by this one place. And this project, what we're doing now is we're testing the interface between CalTech, where the data is going to be processed and delivered to the Minor Planet Center, to make sure the formats and stuff that are being defined are formats that the Minor Planet Center will in fact read and process to confirm them. So it's pretty open data. I mean, there's military stuff going on. That's probably where the real secrecy is what are we launching from Vandenberg every few weeks, and where the heck is it? All that stuff is the world of classified reconnaissance. But asteroid research all over the world, many astronomers now.
One last question or not? Yeah, Jerry, quick.
I may be wrong, but I believe a newscaster was talking about an asteroid that's passing this time, right this weekend.
Yeah.
Halfway, like 100,000 plus miles from Earth, halfway to the moon, and it's passing in between. And I was just, is any of that visible, or we just take some newscaster's promise for that?
Newscasters' promises. I'm not going to get into that. Check with Griffith Observatory, because a lot of times they cover this stuff. You remember when Venus went past the moon the other time, and they had a telescope up and it was on the internet live. So they usually cover stuff. I doubt if you could pick it up just by watching for 5 minutes. You probably couldn't detect the motion. I mean, it's out there moving pretty fast, but you wouldn't visibly detect that it's really moving, I don't think. Well, it would be, yeah. I mean, it would be. Well, but be comforted, it's halfway between here and the moon.
Remember, April 1st is coming very soon. So,
but you got 100,000 miles of safety. I think that's